Oh, yeah. Welcome to God with George Ortega and Joshua Bond. It is Wednesday, November 11th, 2020 at 2:50 p.m. Eastern Time. And today we're going to talk about God and the relationship between religions and God, or just we're going to talk about God and religion. Josh, start us off.
All right, so George and I have been going through this very interesting process where we started this series on God. It's all about God, and that's what it's about. And we keep finding ourselves talking about all these other subjects, right? Especially religion, of course, but even science and psychology and sociology, right? And then always trying to like check ourselves and bring it back to God. But I think what we did in the beginning was probably the best thing we could do, and we didn't really know we were doing it so intentionally, but we went through the definitions of God, and then we realized, if you define God as everything, as the creator of everything and all causality, then all these other aspects are God. So if we're
Josh,
go ahead.
what do we want to say about God and religion?
Well, so uh, okay, so let's take three subjects: God, religion, and spirituality. So I view it as spirituality is kind of this interim between God and religion. When you're talking about spirituality, you're talking about God a little more closer than you are just general religion or comparative religions, right? You know, so,
I mean,
we're just,
you're saying when you're talking spirituality, you're talking more directly about God than when you're talking religion. I mean,
I
like,
believe, I feel that way. What do you think,
so,
George?
I mean, if Buddhism would be out because they don't consider God, but the theistic religions, um, I don't know. I don't know because spirituality gets into kind of like, um, you know, for example, polytheism or animism or the shamanism that isn't necessarily about God. I'm not sure. But
Well,
right.
I think it's really good for us to kind of disagree or at least hold two different opinions, for the audience because the audience has lots of different opinions. So, I think of spirituality as a word that means kind of, or originally it came into being as this word that meant spirit reality, spirituality, spirit reality. And, you know, it's always been practiced as if there's these spirits or a spirit, it could be the Holy Spirit, it could be one spirit, and that could be synonymous with God for a lot of people, right? And then, the polytheism would be more considering there's a lot of spirits, right? And all of this is, to me, from a more modern perspective, ancient people developing ways of speaking, developing language and culture and customs and rituals to address the greater unknown that we don't. Go
What
ahead.
do you think is the major difference between the way religion sees God and the way spirituality sees God?
Well, I mean, I can only speak for the religions I've had direct access to and a little less to the ones I've studied that I haven't necessarily lived with them and gone to their, religious services. But the ones that I grew up in, they always kind of demonize this aspect of spirituality, anything that they called New Age. I grew up in the South in the Bible Belt. So anything that was,
No, I'm not asking how they see spirituality. I'm asking how religions see God. Or
oh,
unless you were
God.
getting to that.
Okay. How, so you're asking me how the religions I've been in contact with most view God different than spirituality?
And then how spirituality, as you understand it, sees God. What's the difference between the two?
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to different pastors and theology, so much of spirituality gets into these other forms of deism and polytheism, um, and even non-theism to some extent. And so, the religions I grew up in were very dogmatic and they demonized. They said that was evil. That was even worse than being atheist, right? If you're some new age religion or some polytheist, they really scared the hell out, the hell into us essentially, with this rhetoric, right? And I don't view that anymore. So, I think they always said, just like our God is the one true God, our spirituality is the one true spirituality, and the rest of it, is evil, paganness, or whatever it is. So, and I mean spirituality. When you're talking about monotheism, that's pretty narrow, and it's easy to even narrow it pretty much more with just a few words. Protestantism or Catholicism.
Let's narrow it to religion, because like if we're going to tackle spirituality and religions, it's too much for one episode. So staying with religion, are you saying? And I think I agree with you. That religion focuses too much on demonization.
Yeah. I would say it's a process of the evolution of consciousness. So, what, and it's incremental. You can't think black and white, right? You gotta view it incremental, just like we see changes from generation to generation in culture. There's changes from generation to generation in religion. And this is progress that we're making as a species, right? So, some of the things that my parents' generation did was right for their generation, and it was wholly divine. It
All
was,
right. So what do you think they're doing today that needs to not be there tomorrow?
well, I guess for one, accepting all religions. I mean, I've been in a lot of churches that still don't accept evolutionary theory. They don't believe in evolution. And not only that, I mean, I could probably find some research to contradict evolution. It may not be very good, but the real issue is they're so defensive about it and combative, and they demonize it, right? And so that creates people in their congregation that can't think for themselves. And that right there is the major problem, because as soon as you start to do that, you make this relationship to God and this understanding of God something that's not personal. It's dictated, it's hierarchical, and that is
So would you say the clerics either prohibit or strongly discourage any challenge to their theology?
Oh yeah, I mean certainly. I mean, this is basically what religion is. It's a institutional culture, right? That believes that their culture, it's very defensive and infantile almost in some regards, right? But again, religion has served a great purpose and still is. And what we're doing here is reinvigorating religion and giving the vision for the future of religion, because people are leaving religion at astronomical numbers like we've never seen before in history. I think that's what we're doing here. So I don't want to demonize religion. We have great respect and appreciation for it.
Right. All right. So one thing, and I agree with you, these religions, I mean, I attend synagogues here in White Plains, and they don't encourage challenging, especially like with this idea of free will. I mean, it's really hard to get. I mean, one of the synagogues I'm going to, they're actually going to have a series on free will. This is so they're getting it, but the others, they're
Wow.
just like, some of these beliefs they won't touch. They won't talk about abortion either. So like there's a lot of things that, and I think their problem is that they don't know how to disagree. In other words, their congregation, if they talk about these issues and challenge them, they don't know how to civilly discuss, debate, argue, intellectually argue a topic without, just like, getting totally emotionally involved and blaming and demonizing the other side and all. That's their problem.
Well, I mean, and I'd say it's emotionally kind of buried, snowed under. For me, my understanding or my experience has been, when this balance in any community or congregation gets out of whack of too much theology, legalism, studying the law too much, and not.
It's not about, because like, I mean, I don't know what kind of law your churches you've gone to study, but here they will study the Talmud, trivia, some trivial, like when is it the right time
Exactly.
to do something that's like completely insignificant. Meanwhile, we've got climate change. We've got this like dictator who wants to take over the country. I mean, they just like this legalism you're referring to. That's also how a lot of times they study. They just completely ignore the problems of the world and just study the stuff that's essentially what you're saying. The legalism is like, it's not addressing what our world needs.
Yeah, and I mean, this is, where it becomes a cult, in my opinion. I mean, even in the word culture, the root of the word is cult, right? And so, in Christianity, it's often the same thing where you'll have people studying these trivial aspects. They'll learn the Greek, the old Greek language in the Latin, and feel like that gives them more authority, or it's an emotional thing that's going on under the surface. We don't admit it when we're doing this.
All right, Josh, I just caught us doing something that they do all the time, and now we're doing it. This was
Well,
supposed
I'm
to be
getting there.
about
Okay, go ahead.
religion and God. Okay, God. Bring God into it, because I know I strayed away from God a lot.
This is all God. God is everything. God is all causality. God is,
So relate God to what we were just saying over the last 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so, in what needs to happen is, they'll learn these other ancient languages. They don't care about what their other cultures are doing. They don't care about their kids. They only care about it in a way to control it. They don't compassionately, relationally care about their kids' culture.
I get that. Bring in God.
So, and they don't learn the language of love and emotions, right? And so emotions are how we evolved as creatures from early on when God created, all of creation. All animals have emotions. Before we were speaking, this modern language, God gave us emotions. And that was our access to understanding reality, the universe, and God, right? So many of us experience this in our profound religious and mystical and God-seeking experiences when we're talking to God or praying to God. It's very emotional, much more than it is some technicality of language, some sentence structure and grammar.
All right, I'm gonna basically, I think that they basically, relative to God, they make us fearful of God, fearful of the world, fearful of reality, which is a synonym for God. But what they don't do, and I think what you're rightly pointing out, is like fear is just one emotion. And a lot of times they get us angry, but they don't focus nearly enough on happiness, on the positive emotions, which is why God created the world to begin with.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, that should be kind of the central focus, and so often, in religion, trying to worship God and their version of God, it's been about kind of demonizing a lot of forms of happiness, right? Because if the church can't hold a monopoly on it, if the movie theater, the theme park, or the whatever it is, some other group can attract you with some form of happiness and enjoyment and community that they don't know how to do, they're scared of it, and then that fear inside themselves turns into demonizing it, to try to maintain egoic control. That's kind of how I've experienced it.
I'm wondering, in my personal experience, when I move away from God, like when I was talking to God pretty much every day several weeks ago, I was talking to God a bit earlier today, but I haven't been doing it as much. But when I was like doing this for several days, my fear of the world just just minimized greatly. And I have a feeling these religions, because they're not talking to God enough, and thinking about God enough. They're thinking about, I don't know what they're thinking about, but basically I think that may be the reason for their fear.
Yeah, George, you mentioned the illusions early, and you asked me, what is the next thing that churches need to get, right? What's the next phase? What's the next generation looking for and seeking, And I think what we talked about in the last couple of episodes is this illusion of free will. It creates the delusion of free will that the religions are pushing it. They don't get it. Is creating this self-consciousness, this inner critic where we're inside our heads criticizing ourselves and demonizing ourselves and belittling ourselves. But as you're talking about, this time of talking to God, that's like a different voice in your head, and it's a different frame of mind and a state of consciousness in your mind that's very distinct from this overly self-critical form of consciousness that these religions have kind of created in humanity with this free will delusion, right?
That's a great point. In other words, like, this free will belief, myth, illusion that they have, that they don't understand well enough to see the benefit of evolving beyond it. What happens with that is like they see themselves and other people as like demigods, as these people who have real power, which we have absolutely none. It's all God's power. And what happens when they do that is that, like, then other people do things wrong. So they blame the other people. And then we do things wrong, people blame us or we blame ourselves. Whereas like if we recognized, if they recognized that no, we don't have a free will, that nothing's up to us, it's all up to God, all that anger and self-blame and disappointment for ourselves, about ourselves and others, that would evaporate. And because like, we could transfer it to God, but that, we're neither smart enough nor do we know enough to be able to like, I think, justly judge God.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to support people going through this awakening, this spiritual awakening. When we find out about this illusion of free will, and especially when we find out about all the churches are, either just oblivious and ignorant of it, or even lying and exploiting about it, right? It's scary. It's challenging the ego, the identity, right? And so, I don't want to discourage people and convince them to leave religion or leave their community of faith, right? And it's not nearly as scary as it seems. I've researched it all. I've been through the journey. I've talked to a lot of people through it. And
Josh,
go ahead.
what do you think needs to happen for people to get closer to God and away from whatever is distracting them from God?
I believe it's this causality aspect as an attribute of God. I think that should be maybe the top attribute that people of faith and religions and belief in God come to recognize as the most fundamental attribute of God. It makes perfect sense. Are you going to define God as creator and, as everything and as everywhere, omnipresent, but you're not going to define him as, the source of causality, and realize that the source of causality is also synonymous. God is synonymous with the laws of physics and sociology and psychology and politics. I mean, that's to me, that's how it pans out.
Excellent. I agree with you. In other words, like if they understood God better, if they evolved, because you have to understand, like Abraham, when he introduced God to the world, he didn't even realize that God is the only God, that all those other gods, the idol gods, the wooden, idols, his father's idols and all that, all these other gods just don't exist except, you can consider them as, let's say, forces of God, as angels, like these kind of like forces that are subservient to God. But the important point is that God is the only governor of reality. And so they don't even get that. If they don't get that God is not just a creator, God decides everything that happens, how are they going to understand God well enough to have a real, a genuine relationship, a rational relationship with them?
Yeah, George. I mean, it comes back to that being able to have a personal relationship instead of a hierarchically dictated. I got an engineering background. I like efficiency and logic and rationale and systems, and structure, but that's not how, we are infinitely complex beings. God made us in this infinitely complex way, and I am infinitely different than you. Of course, that's not completely true. We share some biological and physical laws and the laws of chemistry, right? But whatever medicine works for you doesn't work for me. Whatever music you like that is your way of connecting to God doesn't necessarily mean that's the only way I'm allowed to connect to God.
I hear you. I mean, like, yes, we have so many differences, but like in terms of like understanding God's fundamental nature, that applies to all of us. We're all puppets, marionettes, robots, whatever you want to call us. We are manifesting the will of God. And if people don't understand that, they don't understand the first thing about God.
Well, and that gets back to this causality. So my causality of what causes me to tick and fail or succeed or be happy, or moral might be different than yours, right? But God is both those causalities. He's all causality. And I can get to understand mine through a personal relationship with God and what works for me. And you get to understand yours and you share it. And then we just appreciate our differences, but also appreciate the wisdom we learn from each other.
I get that God teaches, like, for example, God teaches with me through music. It teaches other people through sports, through science and all. But the thing is, like, there are some things about reality, about God, that are profoundly mistaken, that cause many, many problems for everyone. And this belief in free will, this refusal, egotistic, just basically, people trying to make themselves little gods, this refusal to recognize and acknowledge God's sovereignty, that's not something that we want to, just basically be complacent with people, well, they don't want to see God in that way, because it's hurting them. When to the extent they don't see God in the way God is that we're describing, it's not only hurting them, it's hurting the people in their lives, it's hurting the entire world. So part of religion is to help people not just understand the world better, to understand God better, so we create a better world for everyone.
Yeah, yeah, and I even take it a step further. I mean, as you know, I'm diehard committed, with all my soul and being to this illusion of free will awareness, and I reached a point in my spiritual maturity of that I take it a step further to say, semantics and subjectivity are complicated issues, and I'm not going to start the church of no free will. I think that would be a great church for anybody to start, and probably revolutionize all of religion and understanding of God. But my journey is to say, I realize that everything is all politics, all education, academia, even lots of science and religion especially, is against us having this understanding, right? Like this is the the tree in the Garden of Eden that of knowledge, that religions demonize. They demonize knowledge a lot of times. This is the knowledge that they demonize the most, and they don't even talk about it, or let you talk about it, right? And so I realized that is such social pressure and burden. And I'm not asking people to come out of the closet or, make this new identity of my political orientation or my religious orientation is that I don't believe in free will. Anybody that says free will is
it's not about you. It's about what you're saying that's true.
So it comes, yeah, so exactly. So it comes down to, how does it affect you? So we could use all kinds of semantic language like lawyers do to get around it. And that's what religion's always done. Even anytime this has been brought up, Martin Luther, the whole Protestant Reformation, all of the Christian churches in the West that aren't Catholic, they came from Martin Luther. Martin Luther wrote the book, The Bondage of the Will. He said this was the most important book. It was the whole point of the Reformation, and we could burn all his other books. Now, Protestant churches don't even know
Josh,
about that. Right?
Hold on. Josh, just explain to the audience what Luther wrote in that, because this is pivotal. This is the beginning of the entire Protestant denomination of Christianity.
Well, that's probably worth a whole nother show, right? But the thing to understand is
just basically his basic message, what he was saying with that book, because a lot of people, may not, be that familiar with it.
So we don't have a free will, right? And science is proving this. The legitimate science.
And this is what
this is the bondage of the will. It can't get any more clear than that on the title. Now,
no, the bondage of the will, just like that, might get people to believe, oh no, I hear you. Okay, good.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't, that's.
But sometimes people will say, well, it's a bondage because it's like, it's a bondage to materialism, or it's a bondage to governments or whatever. So like, it's got to be for the audience to understand what he did, how Protestantism developed. We need to kind of like really take them through it. What he really said. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can get the book out and we can go through it. I mean, I get the point you're trying to make, and it can backfire, or the naysayers, the evil forces in the world can make it backfire. And it
don't worry about that. We'll deal with that. But
here's how it is, right? So there's two perspectives on it. Now, if you're a scientist, you're a rationalist, you're going to say, "Oh,
no, I want to hear what Luther, because Luther didn't bring science into this. Why did Luther say that we don't have a free will?"
I mean, the same reason Paul said it over and over again, in the scriptures. He devoted himself to all the righteous ways and to God and to studying God and to ministry and service, but he still was constantly sinning. He couldn't rid himself of sin, right? So obviously there's something going on that's kind of suspicious. What kind of just, righteous, all good God, their version would create this this trap, this double bind where we're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. We deserve to spend hell and eternity because we're human
Yeah, and
beings.
actually, yeah, we got to mention that. So Luther got the free will thing right, but I think this hell and eternity stuff, this punishment after death, I think he got completely wrong, because there's no evidence of any of that in any of the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament. I mean, New Testament. But
Well,
there's
get this, George. I
oh yeah,
think this is super powerful. This is super powerful for the show, and going back to God, right, and seeing the power of this God concept, right? That's so fundamental in our, it's what our consciousness is, or how it evolves, certainly, right? So none of the other scientists, none of the atheists, right, during Luther's time was understanding, as profoundly. They didn't write a book, The Bondage of the Will, right? Luther discovered this as a religious concept by worshiping God and feeling like he disappointed God, and comparing that to the religious dogma and understanding, oh, we don't have this free will. Like, it seems so bizarre. We can't even fathom it, right? But you have to understand, St. Augustine invented the term free will. It didn't even hardly exist, any concept like that, right? This is how the evolution of consciousness plays out. And you got to understand these concepts, right? And so it wasn't science. It was Luther talking to God, meditating, being in prayer, that came into this awareness that now science is still struggling with, right? So, and the way he did that is through this hell aspect that this dogma, this dogma religion put on the church. Back then, if one of your family members would perish, right, the church tried to convince you to give them all your money so that member didn't go to hell. I mean, so
all right. So yeah. So like, and again, we don't really want to be so, we want to focus not so much on criticizing the
yeah,
past and all, because they had the reasons and all. But
exactly.
the point is that that Luther began to teach them the true nature of God. And that's the importance. And again, like, this is, because you know this, I'm learning this from you. According to what you've said to me, is that the Protestant Reformation was in large, if not primary part, based on Luther's teaching people that it's God's will. And this is really important. We've got about 36 seconds left in this episode. Let's go right into the next one. We need to explore this, because people need to understand that their own very history, and because there's a lot of Catholics, but there's a lot of Protestants in the United States, and they need to understand that the very foundation of their religion, has to do with Luther teaching them, no, you don't have a free will. What you do is God's will. It is extremely important.
Yeah, I like to do with the Protestant Reformations, the Protestant Reformation.
Excellent. All right. So we're going to see you next episode. Thanks.